My name's Zane. I'm an alcoholic. I've been sober since August the 24th of 2021 this time. That is not my first sobriety date. God willing, it will be my last. Um, so I don't exactly know what I'm going to touch on today. I prayed a little bit and just asked God to help me to be honest, right? And that's about all I can ask for. Um, but I'm going to try to stick to um, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. That's experience, strength, and hope. And and so, um, man, I was born and raised in Arlington, Texas. Had a great family. As far as I know, I'm just about the only alcoholic or addict in my family. Um, I I was raised in a great family, like I said. There is nothing I can point to in my childhood or in my teenage years or in my adult years that I was ever able to look at and say, oh, I drank because of this, oh, I drank because of that. Um, like the book tells me, I drank because I liked the effect produced by alcohol, and that was true for me from the first time that tried substances or alcohol. Um, it changed the way I feel, and I liked it. You know, um, part of what I believe is alcoholism for me is I remember from a very young age feeling like I stood out from other people, like I didn't belong with other people, um, like I was separate from other people. You know, a big part of what ran through my head as a kid was, why do I feel like this and why are other people happy? I didn't understand, from a very young age why other people seem to have friends and be happy and enjoy their lives, and I just couldn't. And so, for me, a big part of what I believe is that the spiritual malady for me was present ever before the drugs and the alcohol were present, right? That's why I turned to the drugs and the alcohol, because I had a spiritual malady. I didn't like the way that I felt. I wasn't comfortable with who I was. I wasn't comfortable with my circumstances. The world just seemed wrong. And nothing really was wrong, but everything just felt wrong. And so, I started off with drugs and alcohol pretty young. Um, I probably used drugs for the first time when I was about 11 or 12 years old. Um, and it was just kind of circumstantial. It was just really there. I don't really remember my first all that much. Um, and I was kind of, at this point, I wouldn't say I was completely alcoholic. I was more opportunistic. Um, I didn't use and I didn't drink every day, but when it was there, I did. You know, from a pretty young age. And a part of my story that I have to touch on is there was a period of time when I was about 14 years old that I decided I'm not gonna use drugs anymore. I'm not gonna drink alcohol anymore. And it was because I found something else. Um, whenever I was about 14 years old, I developed an eating disorder, and I decided, I kind of made the decision. I was like, well, hey, like whenever I smoke pot, like I get hungry, and I don't really like that. Um, and so, I actually was able to put the drugs and the alcohol down for a while, because there was something else that was more important to me. There was another sickness in my life that took over. Um, and, that being said, I believe for me that was just another manifestation of my disease. Um, I was kind of thinking about it the other day, and people always talk about having a disease that wants to kill us, right? We have a disease that wants to kill us, and my disease just got more creative with it, right? I put down the drugs and the alcohol, and it said, all right, we can find another way. We can do this different, you know? And and so that was something that I really struggled with for a while, was, you know, and it was just another way that I wasn't comfortable in my own skin, you know? And when I was about 14 or 15 years old, I got out of the hospital after almost dying from an eating disorder, and I rediscovered my love for drugs and alcohol. Right? I didn't like the way I felt. I couldn't do this thing that was changing the way I feel anymore, and so, you know, I got with my oldest brother, and I smoked some weed with him. And that's what I remember, is I remember that changing, that turning off all the stuff that was going on upstairs. You know, I didn't like the way I didn't like the way I felt. I didn't like the way I looked. I didn't like the way other people looked at me. I didn't like this world. I didn't like doing anything. And I put a substance into my body to change the way I feel, and all that went away. And I just remember thinking, like, there's this part in Bill's story where he talks about I had arrived. Well, I had arrived. I figured it out. I found the solution to the way I felt. And the solution to the way I felt, the solution to all my problems, was drugs and alcohol. And man, like, I was convinced that I was like really, really smart and like had figured out some great cosmic truth. I was like, oh man, like, you know, I see all these people and I know all these people that hate the way they feel and they hate their lives. Like, they should just do drugs, right? They should just drink alcohol, right? Like, this is the best idea I've ever had. And like, I was really convinced that I was right. You know, I remember having conversations with my parents and with other people in my life about, you know, like, you have all these problems, and like, if you just like smoked some weed, all those problems would go away, and like, you'd be okay, right? And man, I thought I was so smart, and and you know, that didn't last very long, obviously, but you know, I had arrived. I found my solution to the way that I felt, and I was going to pursue that as best as I could every day, as often as I could. And, you know, it didn't take very long for pot and alcohol to kind of turn into other substances that caused me more problems pretty fast. You know, it got problematic very, very fast. I got hooked on pills when I was about 15 years old, and I remember this is kind of when problems kind of started to arise in my life. I remember being outside in my parents' backyard, and I had gotten high, and I remember the thought that went through my head was, man, I want to feel like this every day for the rest of my life. And the very next thought that popped into my head was like, something's wrong about that. Like, something, like, I had this feeling. I was like, oh man, I might not be normal if that's the way that I'm thinking. And I didn't really understand at the time the kind of gravity of those thoughts that I was having, the gravity of the situation. I just knew at some level, I was like, okay, I'm abnormal. Like, there's something not right here. You know, normal people don't get high and say, oh, I want to feel like this every day, every second for the rest of my life. It's just, something's different. And, that progressed pretty fast, and I got pretty miserable and pretty physically sick very fast. And I don't know why. I mean, to this day, I still really don't know why. But I have this memory of my mother coming out early in the morning, and I'd been up for a couple of days, and I was 15 years old, and she asked me what's wrong, and I told her, I was like, I think I have a problem. I think I need help. You know, I didn't really like the way that drugs and alcohol were making me feel, and I couldn't really stop either. I had to have it. And my parents were incredibly supportive, and got me help. And I went to treatment for the first time when I was 15 years old. And I didn't at the time understand that, like, the full nature of the problem for me. I just thought, man, if I could stop taking these pills, I could still drink, I could still smoke weed, and I'll be okay. It's just these pills that are really causing the problem, right? So I still didn't really have a full understanding of the problem. And so that didn't last very long. I went to treatment, and I got out, and I probably held it together for 90 days and started back up again. Because I thought, man, I'm good, right? Like, I'm off of the heart stuff. I'll be okay this time. And that was the start of a very long and miserable, probably 4 or 5 years, before I finally kind of got some solution in my life again. And I don't like to come up here and war story really, but I've had a lot of the consequences. Been hospitalized and locked in the psych wards and arrested and all the fun stuff. That's I got all the consequences. I got my T-shirt. And so, it just got real miserable though. Over the next couple of years, I couldn't stop getting kicked out of high school. I couldn't hold down a job. I couldn't hold down a relationship. I would steal from everybody. It didn't really matter who you were. If you had money, I was gonna take that because that belonged to me, obviously. I would. Man, it just got really miserable. And I was not a nice person. I would step on your toes if you got in the way of me getting high or getting drunk. And it didn't matter who you were. And I was a liar too. I was a dirty liar. One kind of thing that popped in my head the other day was, Bill talks about stealing out of his wife's slender purse whenever the morning terror and madness were upon him, and I was no stranger to stealing from the girlfriends or anything like that. And this one time, a girlfriend of mine at the time, I went through her purse because the morning terror and madness were on me, and all she had in there was $100 bill, and I was like, well, that's unfortunate because that's mine now. And this girlfriend comes to me probably the next day just bawling her eyes out about how one of my friends obviously stole from her, and I was like, yeah, he did. That's so messed up. I can't believe I'm friends with him. And just, I could not, it didn't, and I cared about this girl was the crazy part, right? So if that's what I was doing to the people I cared about, what was I doing to the people I didn't care about? you know. And I think about that kind of stuff a lot, because one thing I try to pride myself in today is the way that I treat people. You know, I like to think that I treat people fairly and kindly today. And that's something that this program has given me. Um, Man, but all that being said, things got pretty miserable, and eventually I kind of got caught red-handed in a lie, and the money ran out, and I was about to lose a place to stay, and I couldn't hold down a job anymore, and the consequences were all just kind of swelling up around me, to the point whenever I think I was probably about 18, and my dad came to me, and he said, would you like to go back to treatment? And obviously I didn't really want to go, but at some level it was the last house on the block for me. I didn't really want to be homeless. I had already been sleeping in a drug dealer's car at this point, and I didn't really enjoy that. It wasn't much fun. And so I reluctantly said yes, and I went back to treatment. And I can't really tell you I wish it had stuck this time, but it didn't. I worked some steps, and I got out of treatment, and I had moved down to Austin, and was in a great community of people that were sober, and in a great AA community, and had some great people around me. And I think at some level I probably still didn't understand the nature of step one. And I had done some work, but I still think at some level I didn't understand that this was who I was. And I cleaned up for about 6 months, and pretty quickly the ex-girlfriend had reached back out to me after I had cleaned up, and I decided that was more important than AA. I decided that was more important than my sobriety. I decided that was more important than everything. Was to get this relationship back that I had ruined. And I ended up, getting high again and getting drunk again. And man, that was kind of a crazy thing, because it talks about in the book, it says, it talks about this thing being cunning, baffling, and powerful, and how we could give ourselves no satisfactory explanation for our falls sometimes. And I stand up here right now, I could still really give you no satisfactory explanation for why I fell off. I just did. And that thankfully, here's something that y'all did for me, though, in those 6 or 7 months that I had been sober before I fell back off. Y'all ruined my drinking. I went back out, and man, it sucked, because y'all had showed me that there was another way to live. And I kind of went back to doing the same old stuff I'd been doing, and being the same old guy I'd been, and I didn't like that person anymore. I didn't want to steal from you anymore. I didn't want to sell my stuff. I didn't want to sell your stuff. And I just realized at some level, like, to keep up the level that I use drugs and drink alcohol at, I'm going to have to steal from you. I'm going to have to sell your stuff. I'm going to have to sell my stuff. I'm going to have to do things I don't want to do. And man, that was I stayed out there for probably about 6 or 7 months. and I got pretty bad off. I started hanging around with I say hanging around with real shady characters. I was a shady character. Hanging out with even shadier characters. And that took me down a really, really bad path that I never imagined that I would be there whenever I was young, and man, something happened, and I'm gonna chalk it up to God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself, because I don't know how else to explain it, right? But I was just tired, and I remember my dad took me out to lunch one morning, and I think I was just tired, you know. I didn't want to scheme anymore. I didn't want to rob anymore. I didn't want to steal anymore. I was just tired of doing it. And I asked my dad. I said, "Hey, do you think maybe we could give rehab another try?" And without a beat, he was like, "Of course, of course." And that's it talks about that in the book a little bit, and I think into Wives, where it talks about the grace of families like saving our lives at certain points. And that's definitely true for me. If I had not had a family that put up with as much as they did, I probably wouldn't be standing here today. The debt that I owe them is not one that I'm ever going to be able to repay. But y'all had ruined my drinking, and I didn't want to do the same things I'd been doing anymore, and so I went back to treatment, and man, something really changed this time. I really kind of started to get a hold of this God deal. I started to realize, while I was still out there, I was like, okay, I'm 99.99% sure that I'm an alcoholic and an addict. Like, things just are not going well in my life, and I can't stop using. But man, I really kind of started to play with this God deal and treatment, which was something that I had never really been interested in prior stints in treatment. And I really started to play with the idea that maybe there is a God. Maybe this God really cares about me. Maybe this God really wants something that's best for me. And even further than that, maybe I don't know what's best for me. Because I was 19 years old, and that was my third time in treatment. And so I kind of had to concede a little bit that I was like, I don't think I've got this deal figured out. My life has not gone super successfully up to this point. And I remember walking across this field while I was in treatment and looking up at the sky one night and seeing all the stars, and that passage from the Big Book came to mind where it talks about we found ourselves when enchanted by a starlit night, thinking then who made all this? And that was something that resonated with me, that had depth and weight, because I started to see, that was one of my first experiences of a power greater than me. And all that being said, I went through the rest of the steps. I had a fantastic spiritual awakening. Especially through the fourth and fifth step. I did a very, very thorough fourth and fifth step, and I remember that feeling of walking out of that fifth step, and I felt two things. I felt like, first of all, the drink problem had been removed, and second of all, I felt peace for the first time in years. And like, I remember one of the counselors at this treatment center walked up to me and he was like, "You look different, man." And I was like, "Well, I just did a fist step." And he's like, "Well, that's why." And man, that was a life-changing experience. And that's when I knew this deal really worked, you know. And that's when I knew that y'all weren't, blowing smoke up my ass, right? Like, I was like, wow, they're onto something. They actually have something that works. And man, I did pretty good for a while. I moved up to Lubbock in December of 2020 to go to a sober living out here after treatment, and I did pretty good. I was still, I was 19 years old, and I was still pretty immature and crazy and early recovery and wild and kind of in the midst of all that crazy, I met a girl in these rooms, and for some reason, one of my biggest problems in this program is placing reliance on people rather than my higher power. That's been a consistent issue for me throughout recovery. I will meet a woman that I think is going to fix all my problems, and it never works, right? But man, I slowly started to get away from the program, and things kind of started to go somewhere with this girl, and kind of out of nowhere, I get pulled into someone's office one day, and they told me that she died in a car accident. And that I'm not even sure how to describe it, but my entire world just crumbled around me all at once. The pink cloud that I had felt from being sober and being happy and joyous and free and having a good life caught on fire and crashed, and everybody ran out screaming, and my life just flipped upside down. And unfortunately, I was far enough away from the program at this time and hadn't been picking up the tools, and was resting on my laurels, right? And I held it together for about 2 months after she passed away. And one morning, I woke up and put on my clothes to go to work and walked out the door. And instead of driving to work, I drove to Dallas and got high. And I really didn't want to get high, was the thing too, because I knew exactly what was going to happen. But I was far enough away. I was far enough away from my God, from this program, from the tools, from everything that I had built up, that I don't feel like I really, I almost didn't have a say in it. I was miserable, and I was not willing to pick up the tools that had been laid at my feet. And that I knew at this point where things were going to go. Y'all had thoroughly ruined my drinking at this point. And I holed myself up in a motel room and got high and was miserable and the whole 9 yards. And I had someone calling me every day. And he'd just ask me, he'd say, "Are you done yet?" And I'd say, "No, not yet." Right? Hang up the phone. He'd call me again the next day. "You done yet?" "No, not yet." Hang up. This went on for about 2 weeks, and he called me one day, and like a good alcoholic that I was, the money ran out, right? And he called me and he said, "Are you done yet?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think so." I'm not really willing to do the same things that I had been doing to keep this going, so I'll try something different. I'm willing. At some level, I'm willing. And so I got back into a little detox center to kind of dry out. And I worked back through the steps, and things got a little bit better. That doesn't mean that the grief went away. That doesn't mean that the regret went away. That doesn't mean that my feelings went away. And to be honest with you, that stuff is still there some days, you know. But it got better slowly. It wasn't so unbearable anymore, you know. And man, I didn't really experience a crazy, insane pink cloud this time around when I worked the steps. I just kind of woke up one day and realized that the desire to drink was gone. And that was about all I needed out of life. You know, life is still life. Whether I'm getting high, whether I'm getting drunk, or whether I'm sober, right? I've kind of realized that, you know, for me to expect God to keep me on some sort of insane, not insane, but some sort of level up here all the time is a little bit unrealistic for me. You know, that's just not how it works for me. That doesn't mean I can't be happy, joyous, and free, right? But if I'm expecting God to change the way I feel, I'm not really going to get anywhere with that, you know? And, man, I started sponsoring people, which was definitely a change in recovery this time around. Once I got through the 12 steps, it's something that has saved my butt. That previously I had never really sponsored anyone in any of those past stints of sobriety. It wasn't something I was interested in. I didn't think I had anything to offer. I didn't understand. I didn't understand why I had to, right? And but man, like I get to work with some of these guys that are 18, 19 years old especially, and come in here and remind me so much of me, because they make the same damn mistakes that I made. And they do the same stupid stuff that I did. And they say the same things that I said. And it's cool. You know, it's really cool. Because it reminds me of where I was at. And I say all that because, man, my recovery is so far from perfect today. And it's really like, my pride and my ego wants me to be able to get up here and be able to say, hey, my recovery's great. I don't struggle. I do all these things. I look really good. And I'm awesome. And you should love me, right? And that's just not the reality for me. It's like sometimes I wake up in the morning and I really don't want to do this deal, right? Like I don't want to do the things y'all tell me to do. I don't want to go to a meeting. I don't want to pray. I don't want to meditate. I don't want to work with my sponsee. I don't want to do any of this. But I want to stay clean. Right? And so, like, I take a lot of solace in that part in the book where it talks about there is a solution and almost none of us liked it. You know? Because that's telling me that I have permission to not like this sometimes. I don't always have to like this. You know? Sometimes I get in here and I'm really fired up. And I'm excited about recovery. I'm excited about meetings. I'm excited about working the steps. And then sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I get in here and I'm just not feeling it. But one of the things that I really resonated with one of the speakers today was talking about sometimes the only thing we're doing right is showing up. And the truth is sometimes that's where I feel like I'm at in my recovery at times. You know, I just keep showing up. And I don't even really want to sometimes. But I've just kept showing up. And that's one thing that I've done that has saved my life. You know, because I get to come in here. I get to come in here some days and bitch and complain and moan about how dry I am and how my life sucks, and y'all tell me keep coming back, right? and that cracks me up, man, because I I may not always have the desire to do this deal, and sometimes I'll have a day where I don't do this deal. You know, I don't want to string too many of those together because it's not too long before a drink sounds good and a joint sounds good, but but man, I get these traditions give me a place um, to kind of hash out my my little complaints, you know, and y'all tell me to keep coming back, right? And man, I'm really grateful for AA members who do this deal a little bit better than me, because y'all keep me coming back. And whenever I come in here and my butt's falling off, y'all kind of get on your hands and knees on the floor and help me find it, and and help me put it back on. And it might be a little wonky sometimes, or sideways, or not the way I want it, but it's better than it was, right? And I hear this one gentleman that I really look up to in the rooms say something. He says, I'm grateful. He says his sobriety date, and he says, I'm grateful for that, and I probably don't know how to be grateful enough. And man, that is what really resonates with me right now is gratitude. Because I've had that new pair of glasses in sobriety before. And I'll be honest, right now, I probably don't have it like I want to. I probably don't have it like I should. But man, I do have a higher power that gives me grace, to go back through these steps again and get that new pair of glasses back, to get better in this deal. And so I hope I didn't sound too crazy up here, but it's okay if I did. I think that's about all I got. I want to thank y'all for having me out. I want to thank y'all for carrying this message to me, and